Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 195, Elementary Choirs, Our Manhattan Project, with Bruce Rockwell. Is it possible that we are all grasping at the wrong straws in choral music, trying to reach program growth in an equitable way? Bruce Rockwell believes that we need a transformative revolution in choral music, one where we turn our collective focus toward the elementary school choir. Bruce is a high school choral educator like myself who teaches in a district in which a very small percentage of elementary students are presented with a choral music experience. Across the country, we have a vast inequity in access to choral music making opportunities at the elementary level, even more so than other levels. Not only disparities in access to high-level experiences like an elementary school all-state or honor choir, but also access to basic school choirs. In this episode, Bruce and I discuss the problems that arise. For example, when we don't have choral students, we don't have choral parents. When we don't have choral parents, we don't have administrators that see our work as important. This is the danger of not tending the roots. We have developed a top-down perspective on what we are concerned with. We are concerned with equity issues of representation at the top. Who makes the all-state choir? Who doesn't make it? Whose music is being programmed? Whose music is not being programmed? Now, these are all fine things to ask. In fact, I would say they are crucial things to ask. But if this is all we talk about, it's like noticing blemishes on the end of a leaf and continually pruning them without bothering to check under the earth for the health of the tree. We also discuss the problem of our professional organizations being run mostly by collegiate directors. These directors may be very supportive and have the best of intentions, but the reality is that they are separated in many ways from the consequences of not having elementary school choirs. You can have an inequitable system, after all, and still have the top look very shiny. So tune in and have your thinking stimulated and challenged. Then weigh in yourself on Facebook in the Choralosophers group or over on choralosophy.substack.com, which is the address for the new Choralosophy community. Of course, the Choralosophy checkout code gets you a discount on a lot of really helpful products that music educators would need. So, of course, Sight Reading Factory memberships at sightreadingfactory.com. Enter Choralosophy at checkout every time, and you can get that discount every time. Also at mymusicfolders.com, mychoirrobes.com. You can get sheet music at graphitepublishing.com and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All with that Choralosophy discount save you and your program some money. Ludus, the platform trusted by thousands of organizers to power their event ticketing, marketing, and fundraising, has just upped its game with an incredible new feature, volunteer management. Now you can streamline your volunteer coordination like never before. Volunteers can easily sign up for opportunities and shifts online while you effortlessly approve sign-ups, track hours, and manage your volunteer team. Say goodbye to volunteer management headaches and hello to seamless coordination with Ludus. Try it at ludus.com/choralosophy and revolutionize your events. Patreon members really keep this show going financially every month, making sure all the costs are covered out of pocket. But they also get access to my Google folder of goodies, the private podcast feed. They find out who's coming on the show ahead of time, and a variety of other fun little conversations that we're able to have over on the Patreon page. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Brannigan Lawrence, Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, Jonah Clicksbull, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, DF, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. All right, everyone. I am here with Bruce Rockwell, better known as the singer of the band Rockwell. I'm sure. Is that true? Are you a secret famous rock singer?
No, that there's no connection there.
Okay.
I would have liked to be part of the Berry Gordy family for career reasons, but no, that's not me.
Okay. Well, I should have done my research before you signed on. Well, Bruce, I'm excited to have you here. I have a chance to talk with you. You're one of my most frequent interlocutors on Facebook and lots of great discussions that we've had over the last few years. So this is awesome to have you. Welcome to Choralosophy.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Why don't we learn a little bit about you first? The audience might be interested in where you come from, what type of work you do, and kind of what got you to that point in your life.
Okay. Well, it was a circuitous route, I guess. I was a band kid in public school, and so I did the fifth grade pullouts on trombone in the halcyon days of the California music education system before Prop 13, which ages me a bit. And that changed my life and set me on a path, and changed my experience in school, and all for the better. And then through a long series of events, um, I I ended up getting my bachelor's degree at UC Santa Cruz, and then I went to the San Francisco Conservatory of Music for my master's. My teaching career has been, kind of checks a bunch of different boxes. I was the instrumental teacher at the San Francisco Waldorf schools, so I got to see that system work, where the whole school sings together every morning. And then I've been in my current position. I've been in that now for 15 years. And so I've gotten to see a lot of the challenges that we have in the schools with choral music when we're not doing choral music right at the lower levels.
Yeah.
And my program has grown, and it's gotten better and better as the long learning curve that I've been on has improved. So have my choirs and my schools and my students' experiences. But I'm in the same boat as a lot of high school choir teachers, of having to sort of spin gold out of straw, or spin gold out of nothing, as it is for a lot of teachers, where there's no feeder system. There's nothing underneath us what we do. We're trying
Yeah.
to build a house from the roof down. That's kind of where we've gone back and forth about this issue of having our foundation, really focusing on the foundation of what it is we do, and which is, for the purposes of our discussion, is schools in the elementary schools. Choirs in the elementary schools.
Right.
Getting children singing, and that is what some states do fairly well. Some states are, consistently have choirs in the elementary schools, and therefore there'll be strong choirs in the secondary schools when you have that foundation.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't have that foundation, you don't have that expectation for various number of reasons. It really puts everything at risk. And so that's kind of where I am in my job now, in the mid-career phase of things, is to really try to advocate for a kind of a cultural change in the leadership of our profession, to spend more time and energy on the actual foundation of what we do.
Right.
Children singing.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I think one of the things that has caused you and I to go kind of engage in this topic, oftentimes in cahoots, as we agree on a lot of these things related to where the inequities start. But it's tricky because in many ways, I feel like, and you are welcome, just like on Facebook, to disagree with me if you don't agree with this, but I feel like sometimes I am fighting a battle. When I advocate for this topic, I am fighting a battle on two fronts. I'm fighting a battle from what we would typically, as teachers, complain about related to educational policy change, and that would be, the typical, I'll call it the right-wing response to these types of things, which is we don't need to be having so much art in schools anyway. The public schools are not where we need our funding, those types of things. So there's that argument when you make the we need more music argument. But then I also feel like I'm fighting it from the left as well. And I'm fighting it in the way that we talk about a lot of equity issues, which is very much not bottom up. We tend to focus on how many visible faces can we put at the upper echelons of an ecosystem before we can start to use representation to filter that inequity away. And that's fine in sentiment. I personally don't agree that that's how it would work. I think we have to start with the elementary schools, and we have to start building these skills from the bottom up. And so it does put me at odds with with certain types of people, and that's how you and I have kind of started these conversations. So, what are your thoughts about that observation that I'm making?
Well, I think that the concern about equity is really apt, and because there is a lot of inequity in what we do, and what we do that is so precious is really offered to a privileged clientele all too often, and so and I really get that, and but I also believe that we really need to start fixing it where that inequity starts. And that really is in our elementary schools.
Hmm.
And it's not, and the issue out there is, do we, since people have had really different and inequitable access to what we do, then do we later on in high school, do we have a different set of standards for those kids who didn't have access to the, all the sightseeing pedagogy, the great, the high standards of performance and rehearsal skills and everything. Do we then what do we do to involve them in our all state choirs, in our this and that, so I think that's apt. I mean, it's certainly intended well, but I think that it really has to start. I think we need to lessen the inequities themselves, right? Because if we then say that, I mean, it's almost like we're giving up. It's almost like we're enshrining the inequities and saying, well, we really have no intention of getting choirs to everybody. So let's just, game the system later on so that we can kind of equate, we can level the playing field of who can do it. And I think that I'm not ready to say that. I'm not ready to say that we have no intention of getting all of our children singing. I think that we really need to, as a body of professional choral educators, say that that is our number one priority now. We
Yeah.
need kind of like this Manhattan Project that gets our our curriculum to everybody, and in that way everybody is going to be more eligible to access the highest levels of achievement later on.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and say that I don't even know, like when I teach, I have a lot of kids that make all state choir in Missouri, and we're good at that audition. My kids go prepared, and we always have kids make it. But that's not why I teach. Like even and so this idea that like we're not equitable or inclusive until kids are making all state choir to me seems just so backwards, because even the kids that make all state choir are maybe, a 0.5% of my program.
Yeah,
So it's
mine
not,
too.
and so like the idea that choir doesn't become transformative or meaningful until you make all state choir is just an anathema to my way of thinking.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and so, for example, if the argument seems to be that we need to level the playing field at the all-state choir level, so that we can inspire kids to move forward with music or have opportunities and give kids that opportunity that other kids have. But the thing is, with my own students, many of whom don't make all-state choir, it's my job as a teacher to present them with inspiring opportunities at every step of the rung of the ladder that they're ready for.
Yeah,
So that might not be all-state choir because they're not ready for it.
right,
Thoughts?
right. Oh, absolutely. And I'm in the same boat. Very, very few of my students make it into all state.
Hmm.
Um, but what I do is really for everybody else. And I need to give them access to all of the musically empowering pedagogy that I can give them,
Hmm.
right? And I do think that in some way, though, knowing that my a certain amount of kids are going to be auditioning for All State, that does kind of up my game, right? And it does for all, it gives it just another reason to teach them the skills that they're going to need to do well on that audition, right? and that might be somewhat extrinsic, but it's still another motivation for me to teach those skills to everybody.
Yeah. No,
And
you're right, and it's kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats. It's a little bit of that happens in choir programs too, where the kids come, they see those all staters and how much practice it took for them to make it, and even the kids that don't make it, there is a learning, there's an inspiration. Oftentimes, it's our younger kids looking up to the older kids who made the all state choir, and then how does that affect their work ethic going forward? So I think you mentioned an extrinsic motivation versus an intrinsic motivation, almost as if you, pardon my observation, but almost like you had to apologize that it's extrinsic. But we are so incentive driven as humans. It's okay to have
right.
extrinsic motivations.
Oh,
Thoughts?
yeah, I'm okay with that too.
Yeah, yeah,
But that I'm just recognizing that that is one extrinsic motivator uh, um, for me to teach sight singing and musicianship and theory, along with the repertoire and everything like that. So,
right.
and that's fine. I'm motivated by a combination of intrinsic and extrinsic motivator. I think we all are.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it's just a matter of making sure that the one doesn't eclipse the other. The way I kind of think of that is that I sometimes use extrinsic motivators to maybe kind of prime the pump of motivation in my choirs to get to that place of intrinsic motivation, because I do think that is better, right? That is the place where we want to go, where we don't need to offer the trophy or offer the scholarship or offer the leadership job title or whatever it is. We
Hmm.
don't People will be really involved in what we do and highly motivated for what it is.
Yeah.
uh, so I use some extrinsic motivators to bring people to an intrinsic motivation, but anyhow, but the thing is, going back to this discussion, we can't give them all that if they're not in our classrooms, right? We can't, if they're not in choirs, they're not going to ever get any of the benefits, no matter what we do. No matter what we do in the high school, no matter what we do with our audition rubrics, none of that's going to matter if our kids aren't singing.
Yep.
And there are certainly states that do this very well, where there is an expectation that elementary schools will have a choir, and it will be part of a pathway, a sequential pathway that leads through the 12th grade and beyond. And those states often have, tremendous participation in that. I know that the data says that on average, the national average in a high school is that a high school will have 13% of its student body in the choir program.
I am really excited to announce, after many requests, there is now a Choralosophy merch store. All you need to do is go to the website, choralosophy.com, look for the shop button in the top. You can find Literacy is Equity shirts and sweatshirts and signs for your room. You can find the Thank You for Your Mistake signs, which I love to put on the wall of a classroom, as well as a variety of other show designs. And you can sport your Choralosopher status by going to choralosophy.com/shop and checking out the store there.
Okay. And that's the national average. And know that there are a lot of high schools with 20% of their student body in the choir program and 25, in order to balance out those who were like 3%, 4%, or 0%, right? In order to make 13% the average, there are school systems that produce tremendous participation, transformative participation in what we do. They have to start that in elementary schools, right? And so for me, it's been that I think there's about 30 some elementary schools in my district. And there's, any given year, there might be 3 or 4 where they have choir.
Oh, wow.
And predictably, then the middle schools are very lacking in that area. I think there's 7 middle schools. There's only one with an actual program, that's actual sequential, where there's more than one class to join, and there are several that don't have any choir at all.
Wow.
So, and that starts in the elementary school, and there are reasons for that. One of the reasons in our case is that they came to call our general music curriculum general vocal or vocal general.
Yeah.
So the idea was that um, the singing would happen in that half hour of general music, right? Um, and that was it, right? So we have our instrumental program in all the elementary schools, but choir was supposed to somehow be subsumed into general music, and somehow someone thought that was gonna work. And so well, it's possible that decision wasn't made deliberately. It was probably just a budget cut. Um, and but in any case, we have thousands of students who just don't have access to singing in a school choir.
Yeah.
And then so we have to build it from the roof down, as I said,
Yeah.
in high schools. So when you have that situation, all those students just don't have access to it, and so when we don't have choral students, we don't have choral parents, and when we don't have choral parents, we don't have administrators who know that it's important to their
Yep.
community. They're just sort of used to not having it, and that becomes normalized. So that's the danger. That's the danger of not tending the foundation of our system. I think of it as roots. I grow fruit trees here in my yard here, and I think we have a very top-down perspective about what we're supposed to be concerned with and what we put our energy towards.
Yep.
Right? Our organizations of professional leadership are basically college professors, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least on the executive committee, making the most important decisions, and sometimes they'll have people from K through 12 running honor choirs and doing things like that, or an RNS position, or things like that. But it's basically the leadership is coming from a perspective of higher education, and I mean nothing against these people. Great people and wonderful, but some of them don't have any experience teaching in K through 12, and I think that might have to do with a sort of a top-down perspective. We spend a lot of time on things like conferences and honor choirs and conference performances and our college university. We spend a lot of energy on that, but I don't see a lot of energy going towards what we do, which are kind of like the roots of our system. Like I was saying, I grow fruit. Our system of choral education seems to care about the fruit.
No, you're absolutely right. Let me ask you a kind of more specific driving question. So, you mentioned leadership in organizations like MENC, like ACDA, and you I think rightly point out that most of the leadership are college professors, and because I share the same trepidation. I'm willing to criticize that system, but at the same time, or that tendency within the system, I guess is maybe a better way to say it. Um, but why, in your opinion, does being at that secondary or that higher ed level cause us to miss what seems to be so obvious, which is that if we don't teach fifth graders to sing, then ninth graders won't sing. And if ninth graders don't sing, then collegiate freshmen won't sing. That seems so obvious, but yet we don't have that Manhattan Project for creating elementary school singing opportunities happening. So, in your opinion, where does that disconnect, and where does it come from in your mind?
My suspicion is simply that they're not a, they don't have a personal experience with it. No matter how the state K through 12 choral education system is, whether it's just like a dynamite system like they have in Florida, for instance, or if it's something like here in a lot of the southwestern states, which are very sparse, um, it still doesn't it's not going to directly impact. They're going to get great singers auditioning for the universities. State universities are all going to get great singers. They're all going to get people who've been in all state. They've been because you can have a very inequitable system and still produce enough great singers to to be in all of the college and orchestra
And to make it look like
systems, right?
everything's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you're gonna be fine no matter how things are. But so I just don't think that they're often quite aware of just how bad things might be in a particular state.
Hmm.
And if you and there's not great data on this too, right? But I mean, I've been up and down. I've got friends all around the state, and I know that we're just not doing elementary choir well at all in my state, and in several others around this part of the country. And I know that there are states who do it just fantastic, right? And and so I'm thinking that it's just because it's not a not such a direct impact at the level of higher education, it's not as much of a concern, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I've had to deal with this insufficiency, I guess I should say, for the whole time that I've been teaching in my current position, and it kind of clashes with my memory of the the music education system in California when I was growing up. You know, we had
Hmm.
choirs in the elementary schools, we had big choirs, we had you know, there was a lot of money for the arts, and so uh, it's just been kind of for me a sort of a source of continual frustration, you know, that where I have to do this. I have to create a program without a real foundation, and the others as well, right?
Yeah.
So I don't really know of too many teachers in my state that can say, well, you know, we have choirs in our elementary schools. We've got really big choirs in middle schools. I mean, middle schools should have 20% of their population in the choir program. Well,
Hmm.
what's yours, you know? So
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that I've observed over my years in education is that with elementary school teachers, oftentimes they don't have the support from their administrators with simple things like a budget, or any kind of extra duty after school pay for doing the same things that maybe even within their own school district, maybe their high school and middle school colleagues have. So they might be asked to do something that they're not being paid to do. So, for example, that trickles then into the professional organizations. Well, if they've got less school districts paying membership fees as part of professional development out of a budget for the high school teachers, but then they're not doing that for the elementary school teachers, then you show up at the organization's event and the tail wags the dog. They're gonna worry about their clientele, that is the organizations, and hardly any elementary school teachers are there.
yeah,
So there's nobody to advocate for them within those organizations, and so that's kind of like in fairness to the organizations. They kind of they're serving their clientele, and the elementary school folks aren't coming by and
out there,
large.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but someone has to realize that that is a feedback loop,
Yep.
and make it a priority, even if there aren't a lot of people at the table at
Mm-hmm.
first,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, I've been trying to put the bug in the ear that we have an all-state elementary all-state in California, you know, and it is there's probably not a lot of people, not maybe not a lot of voices who are pushing for that because we don't have a lot of of elementary school aged singers. But that shouldn't stop us, right? I mean, we should look at the other states who are doing this really, really well and look at their best practice and emulate that, I think.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
if we were to have this Manhattan project, I love that Manhattan Choral Music Manhattan project. If we were to have that, what would it look like in your dream world? What would who would spring to action? Who would come save the day if Bruce could go poof and make this project happen?
well, certainly ACDA
Yep.
and MENC, NAFME or whatever it is in your state, and and I think that the states that don't have elementary all-state experiences There should be. I believe there's something like 18 states that don't have an elementary all state. So I think closing those gaps would be important, because I think that's an important, that's very impactful. Whenever I talk to people who are involved in their state level elementary group, they talked about what an amazing impact that has, and those impacts, as you know, they come back to the school,
Right.
right? They come back with the kid and they spread, right? It's like this virus of positivity around singing. And so I think if we can close those gaps and make sure all 50 states and DC have a state level experience of some sort, whether that's an honor choir or if it's something that is more of like nominated, and I think that we need to be careful about how we gatekeep that experience too, because most of the time we need to say that the people, the students and the singers who are in our honor choirs, they have to have a teacher who is a member of the organization that sponsors that organization, that I mean
Hmm.
that event, right? And that's normal, and that's very, very understandable. But I think that for elementary, I think that we would need to find some way of allowing that experience to be given to students who don't have a teacher that is part of or who don't even have a choir at their school. I mean, that's the ones
Right.
that really, really, really need to reach. So I hope that we could do this, we could make this change as well, so that we could have access to that experience to the people who don't have choirs at their schools. So that's another thing, I think, a real concrete thing that we could do. And then I think that in our own district leadership, we need to insist on the basic the basic structure of how music education is supposed to work. We have to have this general music in the elementary schools, which in the upper elementary schools breaks off into instrumental and choral, and they're supposed to be equally important, right? And oftentimes they're not. Oftentimes the choral side is kind of, you know, neglected. So we need to really insist on this basic model where students can have access. And I guess I'd love to see more and better data about elementary choir, what its impacts are, the inequities, and the who has access to it currently, what those impacts later on down the road might be. I'd love to see some data about what states are doing it well, to see who is adopting best practices. I'd love to see some data, or at least some inquiry done on the different models of offering elementary choir, like pull-out instruction has its pros and cons.
Hmm.
Full grade level music periods has its pros and cons. After school has its pros and cons. So there are lots of different ways that it can be delivered, and so what are the different impacts of those different ways? So
Right.
I'd love to see some more data about that. But I would just hope to have this sort of a call to arms among our colleagues, like, hey, we have to fertilize our roots. That's
Yeah.
how we grow great fruit.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I'm curious about, you mentioned, I'm going to back you up about 60 seconds. You were talking about elementary school, general music, then moving into more specialty areas, etc. That's wonderful, and you're right. That's how it would be amazing if it did work that way. But one of the things in a message that I got from you a little bit ago, you said elementary choirs are often subsumed into general music, where oftentimes the choir dies. What do you mean by that? Because I think I agree with you, but I want to hear you spell out that, I guess, death of choir pipeline that you're describing.
Well, it's certainly what's happened in my district,
Okay.
where the without choirs, there is a we called they came to call the general music program vocal general, and that's what they called, or even just vocal music. And that's kind of pedagogically nonsensical, because general music is supposed to have singing in it, right? There are
Right.
in the general music standards, there is singing. So best practices means that you do sing in a general music classroom, but that's a teacher going into a fourth grade, fifth grade classroom and teaching generally when that teacher is has a prep period and that's everybody, right? Everybody gets general music. And I think that it's important for choral music for a choir to be offered, right? So if
Separate from that.
yeah, separate from that, as far
Right.
as I'm concerned, if the kids aren't on risers singing and giving concerts, you shouldn't call that vocal music, right? There should be no talk of vocal music or vocal general, right? There's general music standards and then there's ensemble standards. So you're either having general music and then you offer choirs, right?
Yeah.
Not you don't just sort of call general music vocal music and then pretend,
Yeah.
right? You're offering something that you're not. So sometimes in these situations, you can have the general music teacher sort of going rogue and turning their general music classroom into a choir. Um, and but then they're not teaching the general music standards, right?
Right. Now this
Um,
so now this is an area that I feel like is also we're kind of fighting at both sides. We're there the enemy is inside the gate on this one, in my opinion, because yeah, and I know you've seen me interact with some of these people online, and I've seen you do it as well, where there are colleagues who think the whole problem with music education in the first place is because is we have too much ensemble focus. We've got too many ensembles. We got too many kids singing and reading music too well. And
right.
blows my mind that that's the argument, but that is a sliver, thankfully, of our profession. Do you ever become frustrated that that's an argument we're having to make?
No, not so much because I do think that we might be a little heavily ensemble based because I think there's a big role for harmonizing instruments. I have great experience teaching my guitar class.
Mm-hmm.
And piano is a super important thing to offer. Alternative ensembles are wonderful things where they can take hold, world drumming, steel drumming, mariachi. I mean, there are all kinds of extra things which are in this wonderful little basket of miscellaneous goodies that we can and should be offering. So I get that. I get that part of the argument.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get the part that, well, we shouldn't teach them how to read music. That part of it, I just don't get. If they're in front of us, that's our job. And if if your reasoning for not doing that is that it's not equitable for you to do that, that's just nonsensical to me. You the inequity lies in the fact that there are so many people who don't get a chance to be in our classrooms. That is the inequity, right? So for the ones who are, it's much more important then that we do our jobs, that we empower them, because there's never been a musician on the face of the planet who doesn't benefit from reading music. Just because there are a lot of music making traditions that don't require literacy or sight singing or sight reading. Just because there are those musical traditions doesn't mean then it becomes optional for us,
Mm-hmm.
because we're training people for possible careers in any number of things. So we need to give them as much power as they have, right?
Yeah.
So if we knew that they were going to go into a tradition where everything is by rote, well, they're probably not in our group. So that's kind of like a different thing.
Right.
But they're even those people are going to benefit from literacy, right?
Yeah, and I would argue that even for our kids who have no interest in a career in music, the neurological benefits alone of reading music are enough to justify its cementing in school.
Yeah, yeah, sure,
You
yeah.
know,
Or
take it out of the
reading
cultural
books. Yeah,
context altogether,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
just like hook a kid up to an MRI and watch the fireworks go off when they're learning to read music and play an instrument or sing at the same time, when they're trying to coordinate all of those parts of their brain. It's a pretty incredible thing, and we're having arguments over it about whether or not we should center it in our curriculums, and that just blows my mind because I wonder if we're too caught in the social constructionist side of all of that.
Yeah, maybe we might not want to center it in our curriculums, but we certainly should include it. Artistry probably should be the center, and artistry and community, and at least in my program, that's sort of the main thing. But the literacy piece is really about empowerment,
Hmm.
um, and it's a means to the greater end. Right?
Yeah.
So
Now, it could be that we mean different things by center. Um, I would argue that literacy should be centered in the curriculum, and that is simply because if kids are going to get really, really good at it, you have to do it every day.
yeah,
And it can't be a thing that we do like a literacy unit for the first quarter and then we leave it behind and learn everything by rote. They're not going to learn to read that way.
right. And we need to start young. We need to
Yep.
start young. Neuroplasticity is a wonderful thing.
Hmm.
And, we've all seen really precocious musicians, that we put in this category of prodigy, and people say, well, they're very gifted. Well, no one was given that. They all worked for that, right? I've never seen, if someone is given that, that means they can walk up to the piano without never playing it, and then they can play Beethoven. That would be given. No, they've worked for it. Those young kids worked very, very hard for it. They worked hard for it at a age probably where they needed to put in less hours to create the same effect. But you look at any child prodigy, and you're looking at the outcome of a many, many, many hard hours of work. But bringing that back to our conversation, then all the more important to start out with everything in elementary schools when it can be the most impactful.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree. We're on the same page. Now, I had a thought the other day. I guess it was over a week ago after we were chatting before about we were messaging back and forth about some of the elementary school all-state opportunities, and agreeing that this is kind of a source of a lot of inequity that I've been talking about a lot on the show and that you've been talking about a lot in Facebook groups. I've seen you do that, which is awesome. We need more warriors out there. But I wonder, after we were having that conversation, I started thinking about this idea of starting or focusing on the top rather than on the root of the problem. And I agree, of course, that one thing that would be very helpful is more elementary school all states. But in a lot of ways, I still see that as as superficial, in that even the best kids in elementary school could potentially not be solving the access problem for the average kid, right?
Right.
And so maybe the real issue is, and this is such a harder issue, and it's harder even to bring up, because to me it's possible that the issue is a lack of access to teachers who know how to teach some of these things. And that's challenging because then even just me saying that is criticizing my colleagues or whatever. But the reality is we have a lot of a lack of preparation for what it means to teach a lot of these skills, especially to young kids. Thoughts about that?
Um, yeah, and I agree, and I think that the instruction piece is key, right? And I've seen some amazing work done in elementary schools, but unfortunately, it is just not, since it isn't treated by our system as being very important. I think a lot of the really great teachers can, like in anything, they can get dispirited and burned out
Yep.
if the administrative support isn't there, if they're having to spread themselves, super, super thin, because they're treated like babysitters and not music educators. And if a lot of decisions are made without their best interest or the interest of their students in mind, it's something that can repel a number of great teachers away from the profession, and so they end up, maybe teaching at a children's course, a private sector children's course, right?
Right.
Which I think we, maybe should touch on too, because that, on the one hand, that's, some of these children's courses are really a lifeline in the community that doesn't have great school choirs in the schools. It can be, since most of them are fee-based, that can be part of the inequity, right? And they can sometimes be a competing interest where I know not in the district where I teach, but in the district where I live, there's a very popular children's choir or youth choir. And I sat and talked with some of the administrators there, and don't think they need to offer choir in the schools because, well, they can join such and such choir.
Yeah.
1,500 bucks a year, but they can do it, right? So, and they don't see that as being an inequity, which
And they wouldn't think to say that about baseball.
right, true, true. Um, but yeah, and so the instruction is so important. I was sort of traumatized by my in fourth and fifth grade. Um, well, maybe I shouldn't go into that. Maybe I shouldn't go into those stories, but I didn't end up singing for another 10, 15 years after that experience. So I've seen what bad teaching can do, especially to young kids. So we need
Yeah.
great teachers in there. And I think
Yeah.
Kodani said it best. He said, the director of the opera house, well, if they're not good, that's one thing, right? And the opera house kind of suffers for a while. But if the public school music teacher isn't good, they've ruined generations of thousands and thousands of people, right?
Yeah.
So, but on the flip side, there's the positive way of stating that good people in those positions can make such an amazing impact.
Right.
um, and we need them. We've got this labor shortage now, and
Yeah.
so that's another challenge. But
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
but
No,
but
I wanted to jump in and go back because I want to make sure that it's super, super clear to both you and to the listeners here. To this pedagogical problem and kind of I think why it's such a challenging thing for me to discuss, because like your first response when I brought that up was also to then point out, well, but the system doesn't set those teachers up for success, and you're exactly right.
often, yes.
Yeah, often, right, or often enough, and I agree. But then what oftentimes happens in these conversations about pedagogy is that we then hang our hat on that systemic problem and deny that there is also another systemic problem, which is teacher preparation for these types of skills. There very, very rarely are music educators taught anything at all about the science of how to teach a kid to read music, like what is going on in the brain, what are some best practices related to those types of things. I'm basically making a portion of my living doing that on this podcast because there's such an appetite for that. There are teachers desperate all over the country to learn, how do I get a kid to pick up a piece of music and know what it's supposed to sound like. And so we aren't teaching our teachers how to do that. So when I make that criticism, it's not a criticism of the teachers. It's a
Oh yeah.
criticism. It's a criticism of the system, but more than just the public school system. That's also our higher ed training. It's also just really everything, all the mythology that we've built in to how kids' brains access music that is frustrating. Thoughts about that?
Okay. I
You're
just
back.
missed that last 10 seconds. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was just saying the frustration of kind of certain persistent mythology about how kids access music literacy skill, and so we do have the systemic problem, but we also do have a pedagogical gap, and it's hard to talk about the pedagogical gap if everybody's knee jerk is to immediately go to, well, it's we just don't have enough time and resources. Like, I agree, we don't have enough time and resources, but wouldn't it be easier with low time, low resources if all of our teachers knew exactly what to do with their 40 minutes? Those types of things. If the end goal is to build some type of progressive literacy of a variety of musical skills throughout the course of the time that they're in school. Thoughts about that?
Yes. And I think that I don't know. I can't, it's been long enough now that I got my credential. In fact, I didn't even get a credential in a music university. I basically kind of had to learn on the job. in my choral job. So I can't really speak for what we're seeing and what's experienced now with our teacher training organizations, but it does seem like some of the teacher candidates are extremely well prepared now, and some of them maybe not so, right? And they're
Hmm.
not, like for instance, there is a repertoire of school choirs that is quite different than the canon of our Western choral, tradition, right? And there's a Venn diagram, and there's some overlap, but not all that much really. And there's a wonderful repertoire for starting high school choirs. There's great repertoire for middle school choirs, right? And so I don't know of too many places that are really delving into that and delving into things that aren't necessarily have to do with repertoire or pedagogy. Things like, how do you form a booster organization? How do you embed your program in the local community, right? How do what is the job of school administrator? We see so many kind of naive expectations about what administrators do. So we have all these sort of toxic resentments, because young teacher candidates are not really told how school systems work and what an administrator can and can't do for them, right?
Yeah.
So these are like a lot of the soft skill, like bottom of the iceberg type of things that have to do with teaching. And I think that it'd be pretty easy to run a program of teacher training that really only dealt with the tip of the iceberg, which are the conducting gesture, which is frankly one of the
Mhm.
least important things I ever do. The
I
conducting
agree.
gesture and repertoire and pedagogy, maybe classroom management, some of these things that would be sort of standard features of a program. But we all know that have been in this profession for a good while, that there's a whole another rest of the iceberg about what's going to make us successful. And literacy training is one of those. I mean, that took
Yeah.
me a long time to kind of wrap my brain around, and
Hmm.
I'm still every year getting a little bit ripping off more and more of that band-aid, as we say, and making more and more strides. Um, but yeah, I think that the teacher training piece is crucial, but that may not be something we have necessarily much control over.
Hmm.
So it's one of these situations, I think, where, okay, what do we have control over and what do we not have control over, right? So we got to think about, what difference can we make? What can we make within our districts? What can we make within the realm of our state oral leadership? What can we do? And I think we can do a lot. I mean, there are states that are doing it, and that's just the thing. There are states who are doing it really, really well. There are states who have, hugely popular choir programs from third grade on up, right?
Hmm.
And that have just massive county or district choir concerts, right?
Yeah.
There are communities that do this. There are states that do it really well. And if there are states that are doing it really well, counties and districts that are doing it really well, and schools that are doing it well, then we can do that, right?
Yeah.
There really is nothing. Uh, there's nothing insurmountable if other cohort districts are doing it.
Yeah.
So we just need to kind of make a collective investment and kind of change our focus now to make this a huge priority,
Yeah.
and make sure that those we are training the best people and equipping them with the best situation and the best resources to do a great job. I was getting back to what Kodai said. He said that. Oh no, yeah, I'm sorry, I gave that quote, um, but it's something that, for instance, in my feeder pattern, I started what we call a pyramid concert or an area festival, or something where where I get together with the other teachers in the elementary schools and middle schools, and we all present a big concert together, and it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful event. Um, and and the the elementary school teachers have really thanked me for that, for treating them like artists and not babysitters. Like they are important um, educators and artists who deserve respect and deserve a really high level concert experience. And so in that spirit, I think that we all need to kind of refocus in that way.
Yeah. Now, okay, so I've got one more question for you, Bruce. This has been really good because I think this is hopefully going to inspire some more conversation about this topic because, as you and I
Sure.
both believe, we need to get the ball rolling on this. But here, my last question for you is: you and I are both high school choir teachers,
Right.
and we've been doing this for a good while now. What do you remember when you got this elementary school bug of like why all of a sudden do you? I shouldn't say all of a sudden. You tell the story, but like, do you remember what got you thinking that elementary school is really where we should be focused? Is it from your own teaching experience and what you've seen? And did you realize it earlier on in your career, or did it take some time?
It took some time because I started out without much training in choral education,
Hmm.
and I kind of had to learn on the fly. And so for a long time, I had a sort of imposter syndrome, which I tried to utilize for my better, to sort of spur me on to learn more and do better every year and improve every aspect of what I was doing. Um, so I tried to use my imposter syndrome in a strategic way, but uh, I did not feel like I had much of a basis to understand what was wrong with the situation that I found myself in, because it was so different than the situation that I grew up in, where the choir programs were strong and well supported. The band and orchestra programs were strong, well supported. The teachers were mutually supported. They guarded each other's programs and presented themselves to the community in a unified way. And it just kind of it took me a while to kind of wrap my brain around the dysfunction of why we had so little choirs in my district, and why it wasn't obvious to everybody that we needed to get more. Um, we needed to do this because we're talking about literally thousands of students in our district. I think we have about 30,000 total students in our district. So, of all the students, most of the schools don't have choirs. So we're talking about, 10, 20,000 students just in my district who have a really, what I consider um, a rightful access, a right to have music education, but they weren't getting it, and I didn't quite know, but there was one time where a few of us on the choral team sat down to make a heat map of who was getting music in my district and who wasn't. And so, we put on this map, we put the elementary schools with no choir in red. We put the ones that had some sort of singing, like maybe they had a musical, or maybe they did the high school area festival, but they didn't really sing together. Other than that, we put that in yellow if there was something going on. And then if it actually had a concertizing choir, we put that in green. And we did the same thing to the middle schools, right? The middle schools with no choirs had red. The middle schools that had maybe one choir taught by someone who was not a choir specialist, or maybe had some grades where they couldn't join choir, but they could join it. They could join it in sixth grade, but they couldn't join it in seventh or eighth grade, or something like that. We put those in yellow. And then the choirs, the middle school that has the actual sequential curriculum, that was in green. Similar thing for high schools. Okay, so we did this for our district, and this is in the California East Bay. And so we got to look visually at the map of who was getting choir and who wasn't, and when they were getting it and when they weren't. And there is a neighborhood that we have that's called the Monument Corridor, which is our most socioeconomically disadvantaged um, community. It's the with our most diverse schools, and all of those schools were red. And there was
Mhm.
just there's a glaring swath of red going through the map of what we were doing for our students. That there were these thousands of students representing the most diverse and socioeconomically disadvantaged communities that didn't have any choir experience from K through 12, right? Their elementary schools didn't have it, middle school didn't have it, high school didn't have it. And so, and I looked at that and um, and I was kind of really shocked and sort of radicalized into a certain kind of action, you
Yeah.
know, where
Well, and I would even
oh,
say that that big group of red that you just talked about, for me, I would say getting kids to be an all-state choir is the least of my concerns for that group of kids. They need to have music education,
yeah,
like
yeah,
period.
right,
Let's solve the music. Let's solve the all-state choir thing
yeah,
at a later time. Let's solve getting them a choir to sing in as the first
yeah,
thing. You know what I
because
mean?
they need the music best, and the data is there that they benefit the most
Mm-hmm.
from it. So since we're not offering choirs, we got entire communities that don't know the value of choir, right? They don't know the value of it, so they're not going to ask for it. They're not going to put it down on their sixth grade, elective request card, right? They're not going to put it down because they don't know, right? So
Right.
the administrators are going to look at that and say, well, there's no interest for it.
Yep.
Well,
No one's asking for it.
there's no interest for it because we're not providing it in the elementary schools. We're
Right.
not we're not providing it. That's on us. And so so that's kind of when it started, to answer your question, for
Yeah.
me. And to take a really deep dive into where are we doing it well? Where are we
Yeah.
doing it well? Because that's what we need to be looking forward to. I mean, we could stay in this sort of pit of despair about what we're not doing and the decades that have gone by without us making any changes. But we really need to look forward. And of course, as you probably know, there has been this great ballot proposition where now in California we have a lot of money. So the money is no longer an excuse. That was
Right.
always the excuse. Well, we'd love to offer this, but we can't afford it. Well, now they can afford it. They don't know, they can't hire enough people to spend the money that this ballot proposition is giving the schools, right? It's really an embarrassment of riches. So that's not an issue anymore. So now it's still okay. We're not making these decisions. We're not making the systemic decisions to offer it. So and that's why it's so fragile. What we do is so fragile because um if we if it leaves the table, if the choir falls silent, it can be silent for decades, right? It's very difficult to convince administrators to offer something if there's no demand. And if
Right.
it's not there, there's not going to be a demand,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So if it's not there and it's not a quality experience, right? So it's just very fragile what we do. And so we have to, I think, insist on a different set of sensibilities around what we need to do to advocate to start up a choir at a school, right? Um, we can't we're not going to be able to have the villagers storm the castle, writing letters to the school board, and we can't really go that route because we don't have enough villagers, right?
Right.
So
Yep.
I think to a certain extent it's got to come from within us, and it's got to come from our leadership. And I think we need more tools. You ask like what we could do as part of this Manhattan Project. I think that if we had a toolkit, like an advocacy toolkit specifically for elementary schools, because how you'd advocate for a choir in an elementary school and how you might provide for that would be different than how you advocate in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So what sorts of things, could be funded by the PTSA, right? Could be funded by, whatever the funding mechanism is. But what sorts of data would convince an elementary school principal, for instance, to give it a go, right?
Yeah.
And then what sorts of practice would be really good for them to establish right from the beginning that would ensure the success of this new venture,
Right.
right? So maybe I could see this as a possible really valuable thing, is to have a real powerful suite of advocacy tools directed at this elementary school choir issue.
Well, and maybe that's one of the first things that we tackle here, because as you and I have both talked about, or as I shared with you, I plan to do more episodes in the coming months on this topic,
Absolutely.
and kind of use this as a way to start the conversation in a strong way, and maybe that advocacy set of tools or kit is something that, as people listen to this, and hopefully we can bring more people to this conversation and have people start to step forward with, like, I think that this is something that's worked really well in my community, and we were able to get our elementary school choir to start for the first time. We might hear some of these stories, so that's always my hope. And Bruce, I appreciate you spending an hour with me. This has been fun. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking it on. It's very, 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 very important.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for listening to this episode. As always, the way that we keep Choralosophy moving into the future, we just hit 5 years, and the way we hit 5 more years and continue to grow and expand, the way that this platform can be valuable to you, the listener, and can continue to be valuable to the music education landscape, is you being involved. The ways that you can be involved, of course, are entering the Choralosophy promo code at all the websites that allow that. They are amazing partners that have been with us mostly since the beginning. That's SiteReadingFactory.com, MyMusicFolders.com. That is also EndeavorPublishing.com and GraphitePublishing.com. You can also, of course, go over to Ludus and check out their products. You can do the things directly for the show that help, like go to patreon.com/Choralosophy and chip in $3 a month. And if you can't do any of those things, I just want you to join the conversation. So head on over to the Choralosophers Facebook page, like, share, leave comments anywhere that you're able to see the content. Those help other people see the content and join the conversation as well. We are building a movement here, and we want you to be a part of it. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.